It's week 2 of the NFL season, and here are my predictions for this week. But first, how did I do in last week's predictions? In week 1, I went 10-6 in my predictions. Starting off on Thursday Night Football, we have the 1-0 Buffalo Bills versus the 1-0 Miami Dolphins. The Bills are coming off a 34-28 win over the Cardinals, and in this game in the second quarter, the Bills were down 17-3, but scored a touchdown right before halftime. And coming out of halftime, they scored another touchdown to tie it up. Then entering the fourth quarter, the Bills were up 24-17. The Cardinals got a field goal. Then Josh Allen got another rushing touchdown. Then during that kickoff, DJ Dallas had a 96-yard kickoff return for a touchdown to make it 31-28. Then with a minute 56 left in the game, Tyler Bass hit a field goal to make it 34-28, but the Cardinals had a chance to walk this off, but they ended up falling short. Josh Allen had a very good game, having a total of 4 touchdowns. He went 18 for 23 with 232 yards and 2 passing touchdowns, while also having 39 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. James Cook led the team in rushing yards with 71, and rookie Keon Coleman led the team in receiving with 4 receptions and 51 yards. And on the defensive side, Greg Rousseau had an amazing game with 6 tackles and 3 sacks. And for the Dolphins, they beat the Jaguars 20-17. The Jaguars were up the entire game up until the fourth quarter, but Jason Sanders ended up kicking a walk-off field goal. Tua had a great game, having 338 yards and a touchdown. They could not get their running game going. As a team, they had 25 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown. But Tyreek Hill had an amazing game with 7 receptions for 130 yards and a touchdown, while Jalen Waddle also had 109 yards. I think this is going to be a very good game. These are 2 very good teams, and this should be a very close game. But with how good this Miami offense is, I have the Dolphins winning. Now moving over to Sunday, in the 1 o'clock games, we have the 0-1 Browns versus the 0-1 Jaguars. The Browns are coming off a very bad loss, 33-17 to the Cowboys. The Browns' offense in this game looked terrible. Their offensive line was very bad. They gave up 17 quarterback hits, 6 sacks, and 2 interceptions. Deshaun Watson had a very bad game, going 24 for 45 for 169 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Jerome Ford had 44 yards rushing and a touchdown, and David Njoku had 4 receptions for 44 yards. But even despite giving up 33 points, the Browns' defense had a very good game. The Cowboys just kept getting very good field position, and they even had a punt return touchdown. But David Njoku is week to week with an ankle sprain, and is questionable for this game. And both starting offensive tackles are still questionable, but hopefully they could be back this week. And for the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence went 12 for 21 with 162 yards and a touchdown. Tank Bigsby led the team with rushing yards with 73, and Gabe Davis had 3 receptions for 62 yards. And on the defensive side, Travion Walker had a great game with 6 tackles and 2 sacks. I think this game relies on how good the Browns' offense could be. I think even if they could get one of their tackles back, their offensive line would be a lot better. The Jaguars don't have as good of a defense as the Cowboys do, but they still have Travion Walker and Josh Allen. But I still think the Browns are going to bounce back and win. Next, the 0-1 Raiders versus the 0-1 Ravens. The Raiders opened up the season with a 22-10 loss to the Chargers. Gardner Minshew went 25 for 33 with 257 yards, a touchdown and an interception. Jacoby Myers had 3 receptions for 61 yards, but they really couldn't get their run game going, only having 22 carries for 71 yards. And the Ravens lost 27-20 to the Chiefs, but on the last play of the game, Isaiah Likely caught a touchdown in the back of the end zone, but his toe was out of bounds, so it didn't count. In this game, Lamar Jackson was 26 for 41 with 273 yards and a touchdown, while also having 16 carries for 122 rushing yards. And Isaiah Likely had by far his best career game, with 9 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown. The Ravens are still one of the best teams in the NFL, and I have the Ravens winning. Next, the 0-1 Jets versus the 0-1 Titans. The Jets are coming off a tough loss, 32-19 to the 49ers. Aaron Rodgers didn't have a great game, going only 13 for 21 with 167 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. As a team, they only had 68 yards rushing and a touchdown, but Allen Lazard had a very good game, having 6 receptions for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. But the Titans blew a 17-0 lead to the Bears and ended up losing 24-17. Will Levis started off this game pretty good, but he ended up going 19 for 32 with 127 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Then Tony Pollard had 82 yards and a touchdown, and Calvin Ridley had 3 receptions for 50 yards. I think this game could go either way, but I have the Jets winning. Next, the 1-0 49ers versus the 1-0 Vikings. Brock Purdy went 19 for 29 with 231 yards. Jordan Mason had a huge game, having 28 carries for 147 yards and a touchdown. And for the Vikings, they beat the Giants 28-6. Sam Darnold had a pretty good game, going 19 for 24. 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Aaron Jones had 94 yards rushing and a touchdown. And Justin Jefferson had 4 receptions for 59 yards and a touchdown. And this Vikings defense was great, with 5 sacks and 2 interceptions. I think this game could be closer than we expect, but the 49ers are just a better team and they're going to win. Next, the 1-0 Chargers versus the 0-1 Panthers. In this game, Justin Herbert really couldn't get the passing game going, and it could be that they lost all their top receivers from last season, but he went 17 for 26 with 144 yards and a touchdown. But their run game was great. J.K. Dobbins had 10 carries for 135 yards and a touchdown. And on the defensive side, they had 4 sacks, which Khalil Mack had 1.5, and they had an interception. Then for the Panthers, they got blown out 47-10 against the Saints, and Bryce Young had a horrible game, going 13 for 30, 161 yards, and 2 interceptions. The Panthers are still one of the worst teams in the NFL, and the Chargers are going to win. Next, the 1-0 Seahawks versus the 1-0 Patriots. The Seahawks won 26-20 against the Broncos. Geno Smith went 18 for 25, 171 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Tyler Lockett had 6 receptions for 77 yards, but this team was led by their running game, and Kenneth Walker had 20 carries for 103 yards and a touchdown, and Geno Smith also had 30 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Then the Patriots pulled off an upset versus the Bengals, winning 16-10. And again, this team really didn't have that much of a pass game either. Jacoby Brissett went 15 for 24 with 121 yards, but Ramondre Stevenson had 25 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, Keon White had a huge game with 2.5 sacks. And I have the Patriots winning. Next, the 1-0 Saints versus the 1-0 Cowboys. The Saints looked dominant in Week 1 versus the Panthers, winning by 37. Derek Carr went 19 for 23 with 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara had 83 yards rushing and a touchdown. And Rashid Shaheed had 3 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown. And that touchdown was for 59 yards. And on the defensive side, Alontae Taylor had 3 sacks. They also had 2 interceptions as a team. And the Cowboys defense was dominant versus the Browns, having 6 sacks, 2 interceptions, and a total of 17 QB hits. Micah Parsons and Eric Kendricks were living in the backfield. Micah Parsons had a sack and 5 QB hits. DeMarcus Lawrence had 2 sacks and 4 QB hits. And Eric Kendricks had 2 sacks and an interception. They also had a punt return touchdown, and their offense didn't even have a great game either. Dak went 19 for 32 with 179 yards and a touchdown. Ezekiel Elliott had 40 yards for a touchdown, and CeeDee Lamb had 5 receptions for 61 yards. The Cowboys are at home, and with how good their defense is, I think the Cowboys are going to win. Next, the 0-1 Giants versus the 0-1 Commanders. The Giants did get blown out 28-6 against the Vikings. Daniel Jones had a very bad game, going 22 for 42 with 186 yards and 2 interceptions. Malik Neighbors had a very nice debut with 5 receptions for 66 yards. And for the Commanders, they lost 37-20 against the Buccaneers. But Jaden Daniels went 17 for 24 with 184 yards, and he had 88 yards on the ground with 2 touchdowns, which is not bad for your first career game. Austin Eckler led the team with 4 receptions and 52 yards, and I have the Commanders winning. Next, the 1-0 Buccaneers versus the 1-0 Lions. And this could be one of the best games of the week. And this is also a rematch of the divisional round of the playoffs last season. Baker Mayfield is coming off a great game, going 24 for 30 with 289 yards and 4 touchdowns. Bucky Irving led the team with 62 rushing yards, and Chris Godwin had 8 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown. And also Mike Evans had 61 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then the Lions are coming off a very close win, 26-20 over the Rams, that they won in overtime. Jared Goff was 18 for 28, 217 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. David Montgomery had 91 yards and a touchdown. Then Jameson Williams had a huge game, having 5 receptions for 121 yards and a touchdown. I could really see this game going either way, and with the way Baker Mayfield played in Week 1, I have the Buccaneers winning. Then we have the 0-1 Colts versus the 0-1 Packers. The Colts are coming off of a very close 29-27 loss over the Texans. And Anthony Richardson had an okay game, going 9 for 19, 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, while also leading the team with 56 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. But Alec Pierce had a huge game with 3 receptions for 125 yards and a touchdown. And on that touchdown, it was a 60-yard reception. And for the Packers, they lost 34-29 to the Eagles in Brazil. In this game, Jordan Love had 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. But late in the fourth quarter, he did get injured and is expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks. But they are not putting him on the IR right now, which is a good sign. Then Josh Jacobs had a very good game with 84 yards rushing, and Jaden Reed had 4 receptions for 138 yards and a touchdown. With Jordan Love injured, I think the Colts are going to win this. Then we have the 0-1 Rams versus the 0-1 Cardinals, and for the Rams, Puka Nacua got injured, and he was put on the IR. Matthew Stafford went 34 for 49 with 317 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And Cooper Kupp had 14 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. Then the Cardinals really had a close game versus the Bills, but ended up falling short. But they looked pretty good. Kyler Murray went 21 for 31, 162 yards and a touchdown, while also having 57 yards on the ground. But it was very disappointing seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. only have 1 reception for 4 yards. So they definitely need to incorporate him into the offense a lot more. And I have the Cardinals winning. Next, the 1-0 Steelers versus the 0-1 Broncos. The Steelers beat the Falcons 18-10, and in that game, they didn't score any touchdowns at all. Chris Boswell hit 6 field goals, and 3 of those field goals were over 50 yards. And for the Broncos, Bo Nix had a pretty bad debut, going 26 for 42, 138 yards and 2 interceptions, while also having 35 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown. And I have the Steelers winning. Next, the 0-1 Bengals versus the 1-0 Chiefs. The Bengals looked very disappointing in Week 1. Joe Burrow was 21 for 29, 164 yards, no touchdowns, and no interceptions. They couldn't get the run game going either, with 16 carries for 70 yards, but they also had a touchdown. So that's pretty concerning, but it could have been just the Patriots defense. And for the Chiefs, their offense looked very good. Patrick Mahomes was 20 for 28, 291 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And Rashee Rice had 7 receptions for 103 yards. And rookie wide receiver Xavier Worthy had a huge game where he had a 21-yard rushing touchdown and a 35-yard receiving touchdown. And I have the Chiefs winning. Then on Sunday Night Football, we have the 1-0 Bears versus the 1-0 Texans. Even though the Bears won Week 1, they still didn't play a great game. In Caleb Williams' debut, he went 14 for 29 for only 93 yards. As a team, they only had a total of 148 yards, and they scored no offensive touchdowns. In this game, they had 3 field goals, a blocked punt returned for a touchdown, and a pick 6. And the Texans' offense looked great with their additions. CJ Stroud was 24 for 32, 234 yards, and 2 touchdowns, while Joe Mixon had a huge game with 30 carries for 159 yards and a touchdown. Then Nico Collins had 117 yards receiving, and Stephon Diggs had 2 receiving touchdowns. And I have the Texans winning. Then on Monday Night Football, we have the 0-1 Falcons versus the 1-0 Eagles. The Falcons' offense looked very disappointing in Week 1, and Kirk Cousins did not look healthy. For the entire game, he was just standing in the pocket and only left the pocket once. He went 16 for 26 with 155 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Then for the Eagles, Jalen Hurts had 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. A.J. Brown had 5 receptions for 119 yards and a touchdown. And Saquon Barkley had a huge debut for the Eagles, having 24 carries for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns, while also having 23 yards and a touchdown receiving. And I have the Eagles winning. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.